On the front end, we also can work with environment variables. There, of course, we're not using NodeMon, but you can simply add a new file, .env, and this file will automatically be used by the configured build and development process we're using here. This is a create React app project in the end, and the React scripts package, which is used under the hood, picks up such a .env file automatically. And we can use the .env file to also store data we need here on the front end. So which environment variables could we use here on the front end? We could use one environment variable for this Google API key we're using in the index.html file in the public folder. And I think we got one other environment variable that would make sense, and that is the URL we're sending our backend requests to. Here it's localhost 5000, and not only are we duplicating this code everywhere where we are sending a request, this of course will not be the correct URL once our application is deployed, because once the Node application is on a real server, it will have a real IP or a real domain attached to it, and therefore this will then simply no longer be correct. So there are two environment variables I want to add. And now here's one important thing. Your environment variables here have to start with React app, all caps. React app underscore, actually, all caps. For Node.js, for the backend, this was not required. You could use any names here. For the frontend, this is required. Also keep in mind that, of course, the frontend code, as you will see later in this module, will be built locally on our machine, and then we just upload the build files, so the prepared HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files to a server. This also means that you must not have any confidential data in your code. So also here in your environment variables, whatever you store here, when you use it in your React code later, everyone can read and see it in the deployed application, because it's not running on a server, it's running in the user's browser. So therefore, never store any confidential data in your React app, no matter if you're using environment variables or not. So with that, however, here we could store our React app Google API key. And now you simply set a value here in this file by adding an equal sign, and then right thereafter, without any white spaces, the value you want to store. So it looks a bit different than in the NodeMon JSON file. Here we had a JSON format. Here it's just a simple key value pair file. And in a new line, I will add another environment variable, and this will be my backend URL. And now here, during development, that will be localhost 5000/API, let's say. Later, we can swap this for a different value in production. So with this, we prepared the two environment variables. How do we inject them? We get two different syntaxes. I want to inject my Google API key in the public index.html file. There, if you want to inject an environment variable, like this key here, you do so by adding percentage signs at the beginning and end, and in between you reference your environment variable name. So React app Google API key, in my case here, or whatever value you defined here in this .env file. This should go in here, and it has to be between two percentage signs. So that's how we add an environment variable in the index.html file. In our JavaScript code, we use them in a different way. We use them just as we would use them in Node.js. For example, in new_place.js, here I want to replace this part now with my environment variable, with this React app backend URL environment variable. And to do so, we use process.env again. So the same syntax you know from Node.js. And then simply, add your part of the URL, which is dynamic. So this is how we can refer to the backend URL here. And with that, I will quickly search for localhost 5000 in my project here to replace all occurrences. For example, in place item, here I will get rid of this part. Always also delete /API, because in my case at least, I included that in the environment variable. So that's my correct URL now. Here for the image, it's the same. There, however, and that's a little mistake on my side, I don't need /API. So I will add a new URL here, React app asset URL, because we could theoretically also upload our images to a totally different page. So I think it makes sense to store this in a new environment variable. And now I will use React app asset URL here. So $ React app asset URL, and of course access this on process.env. And with that, we make sure that we are able to access the URL where our images are stored. Remove the trailing slash here in the environment variable file though, because I do have this slash here. Now let's move on. Here in update place, I do send a request, so let's remove that part, including API, and instead inject it here, process.env react app backend URL was the URL I was using. Same here. Let's replace this part here with the dynamic, or with the environment variable part to be precise, like this. In user places, it's the same. Let's replace that here with our API. For avatar image, it's again our backend asset URL. So here I will use my other environment variable, process.env react app, and then the name was asset URL. So here asset URL like this. In off.js, let's get rid of this here, and instead again use process.env react backend URL and combine this with the string. In off.js here, it's the same. Get rid of this part, combine it like that. And in users.js, the same. Get rid of this, combine it like that. So with that, I ensure that everywhere in this application, we are able to conveniently control the backend URL through the .env file here and the Google API key as well. Now, of course, we still have a couple of unanswered questions at this point. How can we provide different values for production here in React's and Node's case? And what do we do with that Google API key? Well, let's start with the Google API key before I then come back to that whole production values thing.